Is getting juicier barbecue as simple as hooking a steam humidifier up to your pellet grill? I had great luck getting juicier meat by injecting high temperature steam into my offset smoker in a previous video. The steam cleaner raised the humidity and wet bulb temperature of the offset, which cooked the brisket in half the time and made it extremely juicy and also more smoky. So theoretically, a steam humidifier should do the same thing, right? We're gonna find out in this video by cooking 2 pork butts on my Pits and Spits Maverick 1250 pellet grill, one without steam and one with a steam humidifier releasing steam right into the cook chamber for the entire cook. And we're gonna see if the humidified pork butt is juicier, so let's get smoking. Now, I dropped the term wet bulb temperature in the intro, and you may be asking, WTF is wet bulb temperature, Steve, and why should I care? Well, that's a good question to ask because wet bulb temperature is probably, in my opinion, the least understood variable in cooking. In fact, if I was looking for a really clickbaity title for a video, I'd probably call it the biggest barbecue secret that nobody knows about, and I'd be off in the corner of the thumbnail with the YouTuber face going, "Oh!" In fact, I kind of like that. I might make that video. Anyway, wet bulb temperature is the temperature at which water evaporates from your meat. If the wet bulb temperature in your smoker is very low, let's say 120 degrees Fahrenheit, that means your barbecue is gonna stall at 120 because that's the temperature at which water starts evaporating, and you're going to have that evaporation start to occur earlier in the cook, and therefore it's going to take longer to cook your barbecue, and you're gonna lose more moisture due to evaporation throughout the entire cook. It would be much better in an ideal situation if your wet bulb temperature was closer to, let's say, 170 degrees, because then your barbecue won't stall until it hits 170 internal, and it won't start to evaporate a significant amount of moisture until that temperature. And by the time we're at 170 internal, we're very close to the end of the cook. So overall, you're spending less time evaporating moisture from your meat, so you retain more moisture in your meat at the end of the cook. That's what I call my less time spent evaporating theory of why wet bulb temperature increases the juiciness of meat, which I know for a fact. I just don't know entirely why that's the case. The other theory that I have is that a higher wet bulb temperature means that there's more water molecules in the air and there's more vapor pressure in the air, so it's keeping more moisture in the meat at all stages of the cooking process. And it's not just because the meat is losing more moisture for a longer period of time if the wet bulb temperature is lower. But all you really need to know is that having a higher wet bulb temperature increases the juiciness and the quality of your barbecue. The way that we can increase wet bulb temperature is not very straightforward. We can increase it a little bit by using a water pan in our smoker or boiling water in our offset smoker firebox if you're using an offset smoker. We can spritz. That might add a little bit of humidity and raise the wet bulb temperature slightly. I haven't really experimented with that. And it's also possible that loading your smoker up with a lot of meat, which is steaming and creating more humidity, also raises the wet bulb temperature and keeps more moisture inside the meat. That's another experiment that I'm gonna do in the future. You can raise the wet bulb temperature moderately, i.e. more than a little, by cooking on a rainy day or in a really humid environment. That's why, anecdotally anyway, better barbecue is produced in more humid states like Texas, in Austin, for example, which is more humid than where I live, or in the southern United States, which typically are more humid than the northern United States. And finally, you can increase the wet bulb temperature by a lot by injecting steam directly into your smoker. That's the best way I've found to increase the wet bulb temperature. But my steam cleaner uses a ton of electricity at 2500 watts, and it's not really meant to run for a long period of time, like a 12-hour cook for a brisket, for example. So I wanted to see if a steam humidifier would work better. This one that I'm using, this Honeywell steam humidifier, is only 400 watts instead of 2500 watts, and it's designed to hold a lot of water. You can refill it as you go, and it can operate up to 24 hours. So to test it out, I cooked 2 pork butts. For the control pork butt, I weighed it first, and then I rubbed it with some Spiceology Sasquatch Rib Eruption Rub. I then smoked it on my Pits and Spits Maverick 1250 on low smoke around 180 degrees Fahrenheit for 4 hours. And after 4 hours, I bumped up temps to 300 degrees. By the way, you can see here I'm measuring the wet bulb temperature with a probe stuck in a sponge submerged in water. Basically, all of that water is wicked up by the sponge sponge as the water around the probe evaporates at the wet bulb temperature. You can also use a cotton shoelace over the probe hanging down into the water to wick the moisture up as it evaporates. That works as well. I'm also adding a tray of pellets in my amazing pellet tray to get a bit of extra smoke at this point as I bump it up to 300. And after another 5 hours of smoking, the pork is around 180 degrees internal. So I'm wrapping it tightly in foil and I'm popping it in my Winston CVAP holding oven for a 17-hour hold at 150 degrees to finish it. Now, moving on to the experimental humidified pork butt, I'm following the exact same procedure as the control. The only difference is the steam humidifier is underneath the hopper of the pellet grill where the fan air intake is. That's where the fan is, and it sucks up air from the bottom through that little grate, and it goes directly into the fire pot to make the pellets burn. In theory, the steam is going to get sucked up by the fan and enter the smoker, kind of like if it was a rainy or really humid day, and hopefully that will raise the wet bulb temperature and make juicier barbecue. A few hours in, I noticed it was not increasing the wet bulb temperature substantially compared to the control data. So I flicked the switch on the humidifier to put it into high steam mode to see if that would make a difference. Another hour later, I looked at the data and it did increase the average wet bulb temperature by 2 or 3 degrees over the control brisket data, but that's not really the improvement I was looking for. So I propped the humidifier up on a box so it was fully in contact with the hopper base and basically injecting steam right into the fan intake housing. Now that did increase the wet bulb temperature by another 4 degrees, so 7 degrees higher than the control data, which is pretty good, and that's proof of concept accomplished. It does work, but that's still not as high as I'd like to go. Not wanting to disappoint you guys, I decided to take drastic measures and I used my angle grinder to open up a hole in the bottom of my pellet grill. Then I used a dryer vent hose and some silver HVAC tape to attach the humidifier to the hole in the smoker body. The steam now enters the bottom of the main chamber right next to the burn pot, and theoretically that should add even more humidity and increase the wet bulb temperature. The new setup worked quite well and I was able to achieve an 8 to 9 degree increase over the wet bulb temperature of the control pork butt. So for example, when I set it to 300 degrees Fahrenheit ambient temperature or dry bulb temperature, it was averaging 128 wet bulb temperature with the control pork butt, but with the humidified experimental pork butt, I was averaging 136 degrees of wet bulb temperature. Still pretty dry, but even a little bit of extra humidity in a very dry environment helps a lot. And then just like the control brisket, I wrapped the experimental butt, I held it in my Winston CVAP oven for 17 hours, and I got ready for the taste test. But before we get to the taste test, I'd like to thank Pits and Spits for sponsoring this video. Pits and Spits is a made-in-Texas manufacturer of super high-quality offset smokers, pellet grills, charcoal smokers, and much more. They've even got a hybrid offset smoker and pellet smoker, which looks really cool. They sent me this Maverick 1250 pellet grill, and I've been using it every week to make the best briskets and other barbecue I've ever made on a pellet grill. With the optional smoke cage attachment, the Maverick allows me to make offset quality briskets on a pellet grill, which is pretty crazy, and I'd never thought I'd be saying that, but it's similar to the smoke flavor, the fat cap rendering, and the evenness of cooking that you get on an offset smoker when you use the smoke cage. All of it lines up in this machine to help me make amazing Texas-style briskets with all of the convenience of a pellet grill. The other thing I really enjoy about this cooker is how solidly built it is. It's fully welded, it's beefy, it has a thick steel design. It really retains a lot of heat when it gets up to temperature, and it results in more even cooking temperatures. It also has a fully slide out bottom and top rack, allowing me to put a large water pan below my briskets, which you absolutely need to do to cook good briskets on a pellet grill, by the way. This thing is an absolute beast, and I highly recommend it if you're looking for a real pellet grill with quality that you can pass down to your kids and performance that knocks cheaper pellet grills out of the park. I'll put a link to the Maverick as well as the smoke cage in the description section below for you guys to check out. All right, let's get back to the video. Now, as for the final results, the control butt lost 38% of its weight over the cook, and the experimental pork butt only lost 35%. So the pork butt with the humidity injection held onto 5% more moisture than the control pork butt. That doesn't seem like a lot, but it works out to roughly an extra half a cup of water in the humidified pork butt, which makes a big difference. The humidified pork butt, as a result, was more juicy, and I could clearly taste the difference, so mission accomplished. So, does a steam humidifier help you get better barbecue on a pellet grill? Yes, it does. In this experiment, I was able to raise the wet bulb temperature by roughly 7 degrees by simply placing a steam humidifier under the air intake, and up to 9 degrees when I injected the humidity straight into the cook chamber. And the result was barbecue that held on to 5% more moisture, and it tasted more juicy as a result. Would I recommend cutting into your smoker body in order to inject steam into it? Probably not. I don't know what kind of impact that would have over time on the ash being produced from the firebox. It may turn it into mud and cake it on and make it much harder to clean, or present some sort of safety issue. Not really sure. I'd have to experiment more with it, but it doesn't really increase the wet bulb temperature much more than just directly putting it under the air intake and not cutting into your smoker body. So unless I could inject a much higher volume of steam through that hole into the smoker body, I don't think it's worth it to cut into your pellet grill. But is it worth it to put a steam humidifier next to the air intake of your pellet grill? I think it is in some circumstances. Now, the big risk, and this is the reason why you do this at your own risk, is that it could soak the electronics which are right next to the air intake, or mess up the fan if you steam it too much or put the steam humidifier too close to the air intake. But I think if you put it far enough away and you give it just enough steam, it's kind of just creating a more humid environment that is more akin to like smoking somewhere in Austin or Florida or one of the southern states, or next to the ocean, for example, which a pellet grill can definitely handle. So if you're in a dry environment and you're trying to get that wet bulb temperature up, in addition to using a water pan in your smoker and spritzing, it is an extra way to get a couple more extra degrees of that wet bulb temperature and create juicier barbecue. Just realize that I'm pretty sure manufacturers aren't going to recommend that you do this because it could fry your electronics. So do it in moderation and do it at your own risk. Let me know in the comments section if you guys do plan on trying this out on your own pellet grill. And if you do try it out, let me know what the results are in the comment section below. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I will see you in the next video, and happy smoking.